Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Jake Colvin with the Global Innovation Forum, which is based in Washington, D.C. So on behalf of the Global Innovation Forum, Level 39, Techstars, Fried Frank, UKTI, Intuit, and UCL, thank you very much for joining us this morning. I thought maybe I would begin by telling you a little bit about the Global Innovation Forum and the purpose of why we're here this morning. And so GIF is an effort to engage a broad set of stakeholders in conversations about how they access the global marketplace in the digital age, and also the role of public policy in enabling startups, small businesses, NGOs, and universities to engage globally. If you think about it, 30 years ago, multinationals were best positioned to benefit from the global marketplace, and those multinationals were probably based in the United States and the UK and a handful of other developed countries. Today, we're sort of on the cusp of a transformation in global commerce. And because of the internet, because of internet enablers, some of whom you'll hear from today, like Intuit and eBay, almost anyone can access the global marketplace. So today is a chance to explore, where you see opportunities in foreign markets and what your frustrations and challenges are. And it's also a chance to talk with our friends from government who are here about the role that they can play in ways that they can either help or hurt what you're trying to do internationally. So I thought maybe I'd just go over a couple of the ground rules for today. First of all, the conversation is on the record, and it's being taped, so we have 2 cameras around here. The idea is to put the conversation online eventually after it's over. We'd like to encourage a conversation over social media, and so you'll see behind me and throughout the morning, we're using the hashtag Global Startups, and you'll have the handles for all the speakers posted on the screen. If you've seen our Twitter page, you'll know that we have a somewhat modest amount of followers. We only started tweeting about a month ago, and this is our first opportunity to have a real conversation over social media. But we also want to have a real conversation in person, too, and so I hope you won't keep your heads in your devices the whole time. I've gotten to know Hugh Forrest, who heads South by Southwest Interactive. This is the annual technology festival based in Austin, Texas, and he said, the irony of a conference like South by Southwest is we're supposed to be this big technology thing, but the real value for us is getting together in person and seeing each other and making those one-on-one connections. So the real value for me is, and the real value for the Global Innovation Forum is understanding from all of you, what your global footprints are, what your global journeys are like, and then how government can help. I hope for all of you the value will be learning from each other's experiences, and then, like I said, speaking with our friends in government and elevating your challenges to them. I wanted to just recognize our sponsors for today as well, and particularly want to recognize Lindsay Grossman from Intuit and Dan Glazer from Fried Frank. Both of them are responsible for paying for the event today, but I think more importantly than that, they're really thoughtful individuals and very connected to the startup community here in Britain and worldwide. And so I hope, and they're both right over here at this table, I hope you'll have a chance to speak with them today because they're just good people to know. I also wanted to thank Eric from Level 39, and I'm going to turn it over to him next, and then Alistair from UCL after that to provide a couple of other remarks. So Eric, thank you very much for hosting. I told a couple people earlier, this is about the smoothest conference I've ever had to organize. Usually in the morning I'm running around very anxious and nervous, and I don't have anything to do this morning, so this is wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Eric van der Klee. I'm the head of Level 39. Level 39 is this little incubator and accelerator over here in Canary Wharf. We're quite new. We're less than 2 years old, but we're really pleased with what's going on here. This had never been done here in Canary Wharf before, startups. If you'd said a couple of years ago that we would have over 140 startups based here, you'd have said, you're crazy, that's just not possible. But it proves that it is possible as long as the content is right, which is why we love this event. This is a really magical event, and let me explain why, because I remember I was asked to give some examples from my own experience. The reason this is magical is because some of you are already thinking about expanding internationally. I can see some of our members here, which is very cool. I know you're thinking about this right now. It's a bold decision, isn't it? Because the minute you spread the love, as it were, across other countries, everything changes about you as a business. You know that cool thing where you could just bump into each other in the coffee machine every morning and solve those problems quickly? You have to find new ways of doing that and staying together as a team. So I'm going to share with you some ideas and examples that we've had, my own experience of taking my own company, Adeptra, international. We decided to expand internationally to the US, so my comments will be mainly just briefly about that. The experience was shocking, amazing, expensive. We made so many mistakes that you just don't have to make. So I'm going to tell you exactly what the most expensive mistakes were so you don't make those mistakes. It's probably the most valuable thing I can share with you. First thing is, we got some funding here. We jumped on a plane, nice shiny plane, went over to the US, set up shop in a very nice New York hotel and started doing interviews. We found somebody to help us find our head of sales and all that. And salespeople were very important because we'd figured out our product. We just wanted to sell it. And what we discovered is that every single person we interviewed so amazingly. Americans really do interview well. I think it's something to do with the way that you're brought up. You know, we're kind of brought up here in the UK and Europe to, stop showing off and that kind of thing, and try to don't sort of overreach and be humble. And I think in the US, we learned from our employers that every week they had to do this thing called a show and tell. They bring in their tortoise and talk about it. Say, hi, this is my tortoise. If you turn it upside down, it's dying. Look, it's dying. And the ability to articulate and present is innate, it's inbred, and and so I think that I'd suggest that, of course, retain all the elements of humility as a human, but kind of lose a bit of the humble when you're expanding internationally. You really do have a terrific product or service you're proud of, that you've worked on, and you figured out that people care about this and will pay money for it. Be kind of bold when you think about expanding internationally. But then back to the interviews. Everybody has done amazing sales and contributed gazillions to the revenues of the last companies. But they aren't always accurate about the actual numbers that they share with you. So there is a couple of things that you can learn. There's this little form that it used to be called the W10. W, or as opposed to the W10. The W10 is the equivalent of the P60 here, which actually says how much you really did earn. And you are perfectly entitled to ask for a copy of your W10 when you come to the interview, which will back up how much you really earned in your previous role. That little thing, if I'd known that one little thing, could have saved us our first few mistakes on the first few hires we made. Of course, every hire we made that's a mistake was a mistake that came out of my equity as a founder, so it's worth doing. And the other thing to say is that don't do it alone. Two more messages quickly, and then I'll get off. There's so many lessons, but the two that I'd say is send the A-team. Okay, if you're going to expand internationally, send the A-team. You cannot play at that and make a mistake. So that means you have to have your ship here, if you're expanding internationally from the UK, in good shape so that you can go if you're the founder. And don't make the mistake of sending the B team. It will go wrong. So that's one of the lessons that I suppose I learned. And the other thing is, when you're doing those interviews, especially the first ones, get a local to sit there with you. Ask Fried Frank to see if one of their partners might sit in just on the first couple of interviews. There's some cultural nuances that we probably just don't miss, that they really will help you with. And don't treat the US as a single addressable market. That's the other thing. It's about 50 different countries that you have the right to set local bylaws and taxes and regulation, especially in financial services. You need to be regulated in every damn one of those mini countries. And the kind of people that you use in these countries to sell to the locals in those countries, those states, if you like, are different as well. So just ask the advisors. And that's why this type of thing is so important, because we haven't got time to go through all of the lessons here, because there's so many. But you don't have to make those mistakes. It isn't a regular service, is it, to ask a law firm to sit in with you on an interview? But I'm sure if you ask them, they would think about that, right? Because it'll help you solve some of those mistakes. So get some local help that cares about you and your business to help you solve some of those mistakes as you go there. So I know I've talked about mistakes a lot, but actually it's not what we're here today. We're here today for growth. And I'll stop there just to say that what we care about here at Level 39 is helping our companies succeed internationally, and also the wider community to use Level 39 as a platform for their growth, which is why events like this are open. We encourage that, and we want more to be here. And organizations like the ones that you see listed here, particularly those thinking about more than just UK to US, truly, so the Global Innovation Forum is a very good source of this kind of information. We're very proud to have you here. Thanks very much.
Hi, my name's Alistair. I work for UCL. UCL's, depending on the audience, who's US? Hands up. and who's already based in London. So I'm hoping that most of you already know about UCL then. Large university, about 40,000 staff and students. And I work for the Department of Enterprise, where we do sort of digital support services for startups. We probably work with about 500 startups a year across all sectors. And obviously being in London is sort of interesting at the moment, because the digital economy and the sort of the UK and London as a gateway to Europe is making an awful lot of things possible that over the last decade were a bit harder. My personal experience with transatlantic startups started a while ago. I've been married to an American for a decade, so have spent the time going backwards and forwards on the aeroplane. And my first startup that we took to the US, we had an office out in sort of San Jose for a year, and we went too early and had to retreat. So I think doing your homework, as Eric has already pointed out, is quite important. And the spectrum from east to west coast varies considerably in terms of channels to market and relationship building, etc. My current startup, it looks like we're going to go to the US by being acquired, so it's a slightly different strategy. But I think it's the sort of the discussion in the communities at the moment is about sort of being born global, and I certainly think you have to look outside of your home market much earlier than you used to. You've got speakers, for example, from Uber a little bit later, and the sort of Halo Uber discussion will be quite interesting. But certainly financing in the US works quite differently from financing in Europe and the UK, and that is changing. It's never been easier to get your first tranche of financing in London over the last decade. That doesn't mean that as you go up through the tiers, some of those tiers aren't still quite sticky or difficult compared to other bits of the world. So hopefully you'll hear some of those sorts of discussions on what's easy and what's difficult, and I hope you have a great day. Thank you very much.
Good morning. So before we get started, I just want to thank Jake Colvin and the Global Innovation Forum for putting on a fantastic event today, and to Eric van der Klee and to the great team at Level 39 for hosting us. Thank you very, very, very much. So I'm Dan Glazer. I'm a U.S. technology lawyer and lead the tech practice at Fried Frank. We're a US-based global law firm, and I split my time roughly equally between our London and New York City offices, with a focus on helping UK technology companies with US expansion. Now, I'm American, and as Eric noted, I hope I don't tarnish his opinions of American interviewers, because I will be doing the interviewing this morning, apparently. So I'm very pleased to be joined by 4 tremendous panelists to discuss challenges and opportunities facing globally minded SMEs. We have Joe Bertram, General Manager at Uber UK, Alistair McGowan, Director UK Government Relations at eBay, Katie Cannon, Retail and Export Manager at Subaru, and Danny Keir, Director, Artist and Label Services at Sound Diplomacy. I thought it might be helpful if each of our panelists could first say a few words about their backgrounds and their roles at their respective companies. Joe, if you'd like to start.
Sure. Is this working? Yeah, perfect. So my name's Joe Bertram. I now actually I'm the Regional General Manager for UK, Ireland and the Nordics. I've recently taken on Scandinavia. So that means I run all aspects of the business in the cities that we have in the region. So far that's London, Dublin, Manchester, Stockholm and Gothenburg. But I'll also be responsible for managing the rollout into other cities in the region. In terms of my background, prior to Uber, I was a management consultant for about 8 years with McKinsey and with Accenture, with an MBA in the middle, and then I've switched into doing real operational stuff, essentially. I think from an internationalization, I am one of the people who was hired on the Americans trip over to the UK to run the business here, essentially. So my experience is more on working with as the international team and then rolling out further.
Hi, my name is Alistair McGowan. I'm the Director of Government Relations for eBay Inc. For the UK and Ireland. So that covers not just the eBay Marketplaces business, but also PayPal and eBay Enterprise and other eBay Inc. assets. And I guess as part of that, I'm fairly familiar with a lot of the regulatory issues affecting cross-border trade and also those affecting SMEs. People often think of eBay as big business, and in many ways it is when you look at the numbers. But if you look at what powers an awful lot of that growth, Most of it is small businesses who are trading on our site and are growing. So basically, if they're tied up in red tape, we're tied up in red tape. In terms of my previous role, I used to work in government as a special advisor, initially in the Ministry of Defence, which has nothing whatsoever to do with e-commerce, and then laterally in 10 Downing Street, doing local government devolution policy, also absolutely nothing related to e-commerce. But hopefully I've learned a little bit since then.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm Katie Cannon. I am responsible for our retail and export at a little company called Sugru, which I hope some of you have heard of, but if you haven't, it is a mouldable glue, and we make every single pack of it in Hackney here in East London. But we have a rather extraordinary story in that we came to market via e-commerce almost exclusively for 2 years. And in the first 6 hours of our business, we had exported to 17 countries. It's now serving 500,000 people in what do we say today? Nearly 200 countries. So we're busy globally, but we run it all out of Hackney. My job started 2.5 years ago when they were ready to start looking at shops. Investors get excited about shops, it turns out, even though e-commerce is driving the growth. And that's kept me predominantly busy here in the UK, but also in the US, because the pull from that territory was so significant. I have no background experience in retail, so I started my life in the arts, fundraising in theatre, which is kind of selling, I suppose, and then transitioned through an MBA and out the other side into a small and growing business. But I've been on a plane most of the last 10 months, so I can tell you a bit about bouncing backwards and forwards and how it helps to be English in America. Thanks.
Hi, my name's Danny Keir. I'm kind of from kind of slightly different world, really. It's very much a kind of early artist, musician development, and I've worked in management for the best part of 10 years, working with mostly kind of popular music musicians, and working from kind of very, very early stages in their careers, helping them develop themselves musically and ready for the business, and looking at opportunities for them to kind of present themselves best within all kinds of marketplaces, whether it be in the UK or abroad. And fairly recently, within the last 6 months, started this new company, which is a company called Sound Diplomacy. It's kind of a division of the company that was started. The Sound Diplomacy existed for a year before, which was basically acting as an export office for kind of different cultural initiatives, and I've kind of come in to develop the artist and label service model that we now work toward, and it's basically looking at the creative industries and offering them kind of business development and educational solutions to best get themselves out there.
Great. Thanks again to all of you for joining us this morning. Okay, so to kick off, I'm going to start with Joe, and first a quick thank you to Uber for saving me on a rainy New York City Saturday night recently. I don't know what I would do without you. How has Uber grown so fast, and what are the infrastructure and recruiting challenges that the company has faced as it's grown?
So for those of you who don't know, Uber's been around globally for, I think, 4.5, 5 years. I think it was in around 2010 that we launched in San Francisco for the first time. We're now in something like over 200 cities. I forget the exact number because it literally changes by a few every week, in 45 countries around the world, ranging from the US, where we're obviously born, but now in cities like Riyadh, Bogota, Johannesburg, Delhi, Bangkok, all of these amazingly diverse cities. I think one of the both challenges but reasons why Uber's been so successful is that in each of those cities we have a local team there on the ground. So one of the first challenges in moving to a new city is finding that team. And in almost every case that's a team that's from that city and knows that city. I'm a Londoner. I was born here and lived in the UK for a lot of my life. And I think we find, given that transportation is so central to everything that we do, and knowing everything about the city is so central, finding that local team is really important. some good advice I was given in the hiring process is we move fast on everything except recruiting. So rather wait and find the right person and do it later than do it early with the wrong person. I think a lot of the stuff Eric was saying earlier also resonates. Then the other reason that things have worked so smoothly is we have exactly the same team structure and model in every of the cities that we roll out in. So we start with a team of 3 people. We have a driver operations manager who's responsible for everything on the supply side, finding drivers, onboarding them, managing capacity, all their questions, pricing, typically quite an analytical person. We have a community manager who manages everything on the customer side. So all the PR, social media, customer questions, marketing, events, and partnerships. And a general manager who runs the team, manages the people, keeps those 2 in balance because it's a marketplace, does all the strategy and legal things as well. And the beauty of this model is it means that in each of the cities, you have counterparts who've done the same thing or are about to do the same thing. So when I joined, for example, a bit over a year ago, I was able to look to our peers in Paris, which at the time was bigger than London. Happy to say we've overtaken them since. But I could reach out to my peers there who'd been through those challenges just before. I can reach out to my peers in the US who are managing a team and are facing things ahead of what I'm now facing here. And it means that at every level, people have that network to reach out to.
That's great. I mean, and that is a common theme that we certainly hear from SMEs expanding overseas, the difficulties with recruiting, retaining the right talent. Just interested in the thoughts of the rest of the panel about that being a challenge for companies with international expansion. Any other tips and suggestions on recruiting and personnel matters?
I can speak to that a little. We had a false start in the US end of last year, and that can be a bit of a. It can really shake a company when you're small. It can be something that there's a lot of energy that it takes to go out and say, right, now's the moment we're going to find our guy in the USA, and then not be able to sustain and support that either through cash flow instance, which is our problem, or just simply through, particularly from a sales angle, generating enough revenue in that territory to justify the placement and to know that that growth is sort of set to take off. It's all about sort of timing so that you get that hockey stick moment correct. So we had to retract, and that didn't retract our growth into the territory, but it did put a lot of pressure back on the London team, myself included, and that's my reference to the plane. So that throws costs back into the business as well, because you've got to bounce around a lot more. But it actually proved to be the right move for us to be cautious about it, to take the foot off the pedal a little and just say, no, we really do need to, as you say, go fast on everything, Joe, but not go fast on recruitment, because that is so destabilizing for a small team. The chemistry of people is truly the greatest asset you have. So one of the things that we then did, wonderful thing about Sugru, is that we're a little bit infamous in our region and are quite well followed and quite well admired. We have a very high profile founder, a rather unique story of a young Irish girl who was studying design at the Royal College of Art, who decided to invent a new material. And it's 10 years in process from the chemistry side of things, and that patent story and that graft and that sort of patience attracts a very certain type of person, because people get quite drawn to Jane and the route that she took to market. And so what I tend to do in my role in the retail and export capacity and looking to new territories, because that function sits with me, is to really put my ear to the ground and see who's listening to us and who's talking to us. And that tends to feel like you make a very good first connection. It can, you've got to be careful. You don't want to kind of go down the too far down the evangelist path and somebody that's a little obsessed, which can also happen with quirky little products like ours. But it did actually bring a very, very colourful and brilliant character into our midst in the USA, who's been able to, as a self-employed sales agent, essentially change his business model and come to us. But we're still in a 4-day-a-week model. So we haven't had to step off that cliff. We haven't had to put full rubber on the road in terms of all of the legal compliance, all of the taxation issues, all of the territory complexity that we get tied up in to actually have a full-time office there yet. But we do have a try before you buy behaviour happening with this individual, and I'm very happy to say that it's going very, very well 8 months in. But I would definitely speak to recruitment being probably the largest challenge when you look for growth.
Question for Alistair. eBay, of course, is one of the lasting success stories from the late 90s internet boom. And now you're in a position to give back to this generation of startups. What role are online marketplaces like eBay playing in making global markets available to small companies? And you mentioned some of the red tape. Can you speak to some of the specific challenges you find that SMEs on eBay face and how you help those companies overcome them and navigate the red tape?
Sure. So I'll maybe take your second question first
Sure.
about the challenges, and then we can talk about some of the benefits of marketplaces and some of the solutions which are out there. So that there are lots of challenges about going global. I think the first, obviously, is just accessing markets, locating demand, making sure there is a demand locally for your product, and then connecting with that demand and reaching out to it, and also establishing trust with your customer base and making sure that they trust you as a brand. I think that's challenge number one. But I think the internet does that pretty well. If I look at our marketplace, but also companies like Uber, one of the things the internet does terrifically well is connect buyers and sellers. So that's the easy part, relatively speaking. There are things like language. It's pretty obvious, I guess. Although it's surprising just how much you can sell just by making your product available internationally and by offering, on our marketplace, international shipping. But there will come a point where you will have to look towards localization, where you will have to also think about localized customer service, and that can be, a fairly significant pain point. Shipping, I think, is a huge challenge, particularly for SMEs. Some of the larger retailers will be able to establish good, dedicated, preferential relationships with specific couriers. But if you're an SME, that's not always as simple or as straightforward. And if you're dependent upon national carriers, you quickly find that, of course, you may get tracked delivery within the UK, but as soon as it passes over the border, the problem is that the national carriers don't talk to each other in terms of their tracking systems, and so therefore you don't get end-to-end tracking. So that can be a challenge. Returns can also be, I think, very challenging as well. Payment, I think, is pretty fundamental. You want to get paid fundamentally for your business. It's pretty rubbish if you don't. But there are solutions out there that we offer, but you've also got to be alive to some of the local preferences, if you like. So in Germany, the preference for electronic bank transfer, which still baffles me to this day, it's such an incredibly difficult and bureaucratic process, and yet Germans love it. And similarly, if you look at a jurisdiction like Italy, it's very cash-driven. There's a culture of face-to-face selling. So understanding, that culture and those payment preferences is also important. Finally, obviously, tax and legal. When you start selling cross-border, you've got to deal with all the customs, import duties, VAT issues, and so forth. And on top of that, despite the fact that we've had quite a lot of harmonisation in recent years, there are quite a lot of different legal regimes out there that you have to deal with and to navigate. Just in terms of the solutions, I think we've got lots of potential solutions that we offer in our marketplace. We're very good at bringing buyers and sellers together, so the traffic demand issue for us is fairly straightforward. I think we've definitely seen a dramatic decrease in the barriers to entry and what's called the death of distance, a reduction in the importance of distance as a factor. And I think what we've also seen is a paradigm shift, if you like, in international trade, which used to be the preserve of the large global multinationals. Now I think you've seen the emergence of what has been called the micro-multinational that's able to reach out to new markets. I think another benefit potentially of marketplaces is that they are mobile optimized. And in some ways, mobile optimization is a basic kind of hygiene factor for commerce and e-commerce. You have to be doing it now if you want to generate sales. But I think it's particularly true in relation to cross-border trade. Because if you look at where all the growth is going to come in the next few years, it will be in the BRIC countries in terms of new internet users, and primarily they will be accessing the internet via mobile devices. So if you're not mobile optimized, you're not going to get the level of demand or maybe the level of conversion that you would otherwise like. Obviously, we have benefits through things like PayPal, which I think make cross-border payments a lot simpler. PayPal in many ways is like a global adapter for payments. You can get You can accept payments in something like 26 different currencies. If you want to make and accept payments, you can do it in 100 different currencies. So that's a huge boost if you want to be able to grow. We've looked at some very specific solutions around shipping for the really small micro businesses who haven't really dipped their toe in the water yet in terms of international shipping. And I think this is indicative of a general trend you'll see towards some form of shipping aggregation. So we have something called the Global Shipping Programme, and it's aimed at kind of small B2C, but also C2C people who want to, maybe just get selling internationally. And what you do is you ship to a local shipping depot in the UK, and then we take care of it from there. We take care of the track shipping, it gets delivered internationally, the buyer sees the full shipping rate, and it's a pretty good seamless service. It may not be attractive to some of the bigger retailers who are able to negotiate better rates themselves, but it's a great way of just getting your water wings when it comes to international trade. And I think you'll see lots of other third-party solutions providers out there who are offering support to businesses that want to grow, and I would encourage you to test them out, try them out as much as you can. There's a huge opportunity there for people in this room who want to provide those solutions as well. But I'd stop there.
No, thank you. Alistair, you mentioned navigating different legal and regulatory systems across borders. I'd be curious for the panel, what have been your experiences with that? Dealing with those different legal regulatory regimes. Any best practice tips for compliance, for sort of staying out of trouble?
So from our point of view, we're a little bit lucky in the sense that e-commerce allows you to dodge that for as long as possible. So we trade to, as of last week, 157 countries. So Kyrgyzstan joined us last week, which is very exciting. But the transaction can occur in the UK, and it means that from a regulatory point of view, and we are a chemical-based product, so we have some extra issues around labelling and compliance, we can remain in an English language environment and transact in the UK. Now, that's great from the kind of simplicity of the business side of things, maybe not ideal from the side of the consumer. So you have to think a little bit to their usage as well. So if your safety information is going to them in English, if your usage information is going to them in English, it's something that we wrestle with continually to really be sure that we're optimizing for that global marketplace, even though we are small and growing and need to really keep an eye on our costs and not be in 28 versions of our packaging tomorrow. So we've done our first foray into foreign language packaging in Germany because, as we've referenced, those good old Germans, they have some extra rules that it means it's a good place to start in Europe, because once you've got the Germans cracked, the French and Italians and Spaniards tend to follow. So that's one of our approaches. And we're seeing that has traction with the user. Of course it does, because you're going to be able to reach a much deeper audience and a much better user experience. Whereas the Nordics, which Joe's already referenced, is a very English language driven market still. And so we can be a little bit more relaxed about trading. We have a distribution arrangement there that doesn't yet require full translation. So it's a really interesting ongoing challenge. Obviously, even looking to the US, you can be terribly relaxed in your kind of perception of it and think, this is great, I'm just going to pop over there and everybody speaks my language, kind of, and it will all go swimmingly. Actually, there's this thing called Spanish in America that's really emerging very, very fast. And then if you look at North America as a continent, you're going to encounter the French issue north of the border in Canada. So we're actually looking at a trilingual package solution for all major US retail, which I think potentially when you're looking across there, you don't really think that's going to be something that trips you up. And as I say, when we're already quite a dense packaging challenge, I should have brought up a Pakasugu to show you. It's sort of 6 sides of cardboard. You're looking at a concertina that could be 24 sides long. It's not ideal. So these are things to really be mindful of, especially if you're looking to retail. As I say, e-commerce lets you dodge it for as long as possible if you're manufacturing out of the UK. But as soon as you want to talk shops, you're in for a treat.
That's right. And Joe, I guess Uber's had some the particular need to deal with regulatory compliance, I guess, for example, TfL and others. Any sort of color on that in terms of how to deal with local legal and regulatory regimes in different jurisdictions?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges we have is that transport legislation is typically different, not just on a country level, but by city. So, for instance, yesterday I was up north. The legislation in Manchester is different from how it is in London, and so that's partly why we have a local team in each market, and it's part of the general manager's role there to make sure that they understand the local regulations, are engaging with the regulator, and things like that. There's obviously also a challenge because if you have 200 of those general managers, you need to also make sure that we're somewhat consistent and aligned in terms of the messaging and the approach that we take. So we combine that very decentralized view with a central public policy and legal department that guides all that. I think the localization point is a really interesting one. I mean, we're dealing with drivers and with riders who are just everyday people from all walks of life. So we obviously have to localize in every single market we go into. We actually get the local teams to do those translations. So the team in Sweden, for example, is at least checking, but often doing all of those translations, even in app. And last time I was there, they actually gave me a quite funny story. I think an agency had done the first pass of the translations for them, but seamless payments had turned into sleepless payments. So they were reminding me how much time and effort it really takes just to make sure all of that works. And then even in the UK, we do our own translations. Some of the promotions, some of the words in app, when I read it, it's just very American. So my team will even translate. We have British English, and we can put that setting. And if there's strings that we don't feel work here, we'll even translate those.
So I just had a couple of comments. So Katie mentioned that one of the benefits of e-commerce is you can sort of fly beneath the radar. And that's undoubtedly true for a lot of startups. I would just say, however, that only lasts for so long. Because one of the things that you find with the internet is fantastic at disintermediation and cutting out the middleman, and it's particularly true of Uber. But we've had lots of cases and lots of different verticals within our marketplace where we've been cutting out the middleman. And the one thing you know is that the middleman will eventually start to scream. And the other thing that they will do is they will then seek to level the playing field, and they'll seek to level everybody up to a ridiculous level of standards. We've seen it, for example, in sort of ticket resale. We've seen it in France, for example, where there's an organisation called the Conseil des Ventes, which is basically the French auctioneers' body, who wanted to try and impose obligations upon anybody selling on the French site via auction format, and insist that they have an auctioneer's license, which is, of course, utter madness. But you have to have these fights sometimes locally. And so if you are in one of those businesses that is likely to be getting into the face of established local interests or producer interests, I would encourage you to join a trade association, hire some great outside counsel, and get ready for a fight.
That's what outside counsel do. Danny, well, so first of all, just given all the interesting types of music that you work with, do you have a personal favorite, can I ask?
That's the hardest question.
I guess I'm looking for a diplomatic answer, so to speak.
No, I mean, I very much, excuse me, I very much work with developing artists. So kind of, I am one of those guys that's out in the kind of little venues around London, really kind of trying to kind of put my understanding on each artist that comes through, and what I'm trying to gauge their talents and their future, and looking at what value they're going to have in the coming years, and trying to be one of those kind of tastemakers, and looking at that. So, and that's an ever evolving kind of the whole creative package that comes with that, and the different musical tastes and styles that come through. It's constantly evolving. So there's a few of the artists I've worked with, and obviously every single one of them has been initially for the reason that I think I would buy that. I would buy into that. I enjoy that as a form of entertainment. And then secondly, I see it as something which culturally is relevant and should exist. And whether it's through the personality of those artists or through the musical direction, either way, it's something that's valuable about them. So, I mean, artists that I've worked with over the past 5 years have been from quite known bands like Razorlight and the Noisettes, to kind of lesser known artists like Lucy Rose and Slow Club, and very unknown artists that haven't seen the light of day in terms of any kind of real success or commercial success. So it's, you know, there's been a lot of, and as there always is in these kind of industries where it's, you know, it's an artistic form, that we get it wrong a lot more than we get it right. And that is not down to us doing things wrong. Usually, you know, that happens a lot, but it is down to, there's a big disconnect between the value of what that music or that art is doing to what people perceive it to be, and how valuable they see it. So it's always a little bit of a gamble, and you've got to kind of be savvy to what culturally is happening as well as what the talent is giving. So, you know, it's quite a hard thing to package in terms of making people buy into that kind of thing.
How do you, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, it sounds like a little bit more of an art rather than a science, obviously. What do you then look for when it comes to prioritizing countries where you're going to engage, and what types of music you engage in a particular country?
Well, it kind of, the way we kind of work as a company is we look at the markets that are developing, and they need a little bit of advice and infrastructural help with their development and how they kind of interact with the industry a little bit more. We generally stay away from the US, for example, even though I manage an artist based in the US who is an American citizen. I've had a lot of horror stories when taking UK-based artists into the US through the visa absolute nightmare that exists. But generally when talking to musicians from different countries and different genres even, we always kind of look at what they have together and what they can kind of, how they present themselves and what relevance that is. And a lot of what we do as a company is we work as an export office for different kind of government startups, schemes and different arts initiative bodies. And we look at how we can help them educate their artists on the ground. So we kind of look at, you know, obviously we have an understanding of our domestic markets, and we kind of look at what we think our market would buy into in terms of their status and their profile and their general sound. So we kind of advise on how they should get their shit together, basically, and how they should present themselves generally to be, you know, a serious outfit that should exist in this marketplace. And, you know, as I mentioned, it can be a little bit trial and error, but ultimately, if you're persistent and you're talented, as long as it's advised right and you don't go through the motions as much as potentially you could do if you don't have that advice, you know, you kind of should exist in that market, and there's no reason why you shouldn't if you have those kind of right boxes ticked, basically.
Just to pick up on something you said earlier, there's actually been a lot of talk. I mean, I can say here in the UK and I think in the States as well about the visa issues in the US, and you know, there's a lot of debate right now about figuring out a way to relax immigration into the US, especially specifically for entrepreneurs, small businesses. I would just be curious. I mean, you know, I'd be interested in your experiences, your thoughts about how you might improve that process, not only from you but anybody else who may have had that sort of interaction with the visa process in the States. Because I can tell you that we're seeing this be a very hot issue right now in Washington. You know, how can this be changed or reformed?
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, from my experience, as I said, I've had two tours I've had to cancel tours, and they've involved, you know, TV performances as well, and that has all been down to, you know, kind of visas being lost in the process and passports not being returned on time or within an acceptable time, and it feels, I mean, you know, I'm talking from the arts point of view. It feels incredibly difficult, more difficult than most other areas to gain access through that. I mean, I feel the kind of policies that exist look kind of unfavourably on, I guess, the existence of, or the importance, of arts in the US from an international point of view, maybe because it's like a saturated market, but there's obviously relevance for these things, and that's why there's always the flow of these arts. But I think that maybe due to a lot of the musicians that are, having those initial trips, it's not like they are required to stay in the UK. They can quite easily exist in the US, and there's a kind of weird misunderstanding about what the agendas are. It's in terms of those artists, whether from my experience, usually it's been showcasing and developing in the market, not trying to find a way to, set up in that market and exist there. And I think that is something which needs to be kind of understood and be a little bit more transparent on how people kind of allow that flow. And like I say, I'm talking from the music point of view. And if you're a young male without a family who rents in a city like London, and you're applying for a visa to go to the US, they're going to you're giving them a lot of opportunity to say no to that. And if you're a kind of middle-aged male with a family, with a home, with a house, then they're going to say, well, that's fine, you've got plenty of reason to go back. And there's a weird kind of misunderstanding about what the importance of these, and to make it easier, basically, there's too many kind of hoops you have to jump through, generally.
I just add a little something on that, because we had a bit of a interesting experience. We've just gone through the process of sponsoring an employee based in the UK who was a US citizen graduating out of the MBA at London Business School here. And I think that was, we had a lot of concerns around that. There was quite a lot of scaremongering that existed around it. Oh, I don't know, ooh, I wouldn't be sure. You're still growing as a business, and you're not established, and and all of the, how much are they going to want to dig into your stability as well as the individual as a talent that you require? And it was very important for us to have a US citizen in our UK team, as that becomes our key market challenge for the coming year and well beyond. And so we want obviously talent to develop and grow with us wherever, and then we need that talent to be mobile. And so we haven't yet faced into the issue of going the other way across the Atlantic, although we probably anticipate that it will come. And just picking up on the point of the founder here at Level 39 saying send your A-team. Well, that's easier said than done if your A-team's made up of 4 different nationalities that all have to go through the red tape that Dan is describing. And I think I would say a positive to the UK, having been sort of scared of the process, actually we passed with flying colours, and actually they were very transparent and it actually worked fine. So don't listen to the marketplace and hear a fear and then don't go after it. If you need to retain somebody for your global insights in your UK team, push for it, push hard for it. And actually, we found the door ajar and easy to open. As I say, we haven't yet challenged it the other way.
I have only good things to say about the inbound process. They let me work here, so I'm happy. So besides immigration, can you describe some of the other challenges that you've encountered? Going from a few countries online to being, global, right? And then also trying to develop partnerships and a physical presence closer to some of your customers in places like the US and elsewhere.
One of the things that I'll speak to as a positive, I think, is, and I take Alistair's point, we shouldn't dodge the legislation and taxation issues for too long, but the power of e-commerce globally for us, and I described in my introduction that Sugru was global in the first 6 hours. We produced what we anticipated to be 6 months worth of stock, and it sold out in 6 hours, and it went to 17 countries. Those sort of stories are a digital age story. That doesn't happen previous to e-commerce, and truth be told, it was the Daily Telegraph gave us a 5-star review in their technology reviewer talking about, is this the best invention since sellotape? Pretty easy quote to go global on, and people literally overnight. And as I say, 157 countries as of today, 500,000 people interacting just to Sugru.com. When you come in and look to then stabilizing territories for the company, I sit on an amazing data set. I sit on an amazing amount of insight and analytics to our territories to look at anything from daily traffic all the way through to conversion rate opportunity in those markets, really testing the temperature as to demand, as to appetite. The point that you make about Germany, absolutely explicitly made. If we're an e-commerce brand, we're not going to penetrate Germany effectively, but Germany is the largest DIY market in Europe, so we have to have Germany. So there's moments when the analytics can pull you all the way through into the US and Canada quite simplistically, but when you look across Europe, you have to have some nuance around those markets to say, why are our German numbers so low? Because actually Germans don't trust web commerce. That's not something they want to do. And so it doesn't necessarily, so it's all about having a mix of the great analytics that your digital presence is driving for you, plus some good on the ground research. And I think keeping those things in balance are really important as you're emerging as an e-commerce platform. The obvious thing to say is that our e-commerce sales are our full margin sales, and our in-territory sales at retail are massively cut by all the slices that come out of that pie. So it's also about where revenue growth can happen fastest to stabilize you as a growing company that needs to break even and needs to push forward. So it's a constant battle of compromises, of balance, of chasing down the right opportunities in the right timeline. And I think being a hybrid business is definitely the right future for Sugru, but keeping the balance per territory correct is probably what we struggle with day to day the most.
No, and that's a great point. And you mentioned things like measuring daily traffic, conversion rates. I'd be curious for the panel, what sort of data or research do you focus on when considering potential new markets and where to go next? Like, what sort of analytics or research do you look at?
We've got so much data, it's kind of almost difficult to know where to start. But I think let's start with customer demand. Yeah. You can easily identify through search queries on your site what people are looking for in a particular jurisdiction, and then you discover, well, actually, we haven't really got that much selection on our site when it comes to these particular search terms. So therefore, we better do something about it. So therefore, you can take steps to get the necessary retailers on your site and to improve supply and to improve selection. So I think that's probably where I would start first. But I would also just caution against, when you're expanding globally, using a standard playbook. We've made that mistake in trying to enter other markets. I think we made that mistake in China. We had a fairly standard playbook, thought that we could just roll out another eBay site there, and it just didn't work. So if you're going global, you've got to really, really think locally and think about local preference.
So once that you decide to expand, I mean, from a local business to a larger one or to an international one, I mean, social media is so powerful now. Like, how do you think it can best be leveraged to support expansion and international operations?
Well, we kind of always, I mean, I guess as everyone does, like, we constantly refer to the activity and the energy that's around these social media platforms. And when we're looking at different artists, and we do an awful lot of stuff in kind of, like I said before, in developing markets. So we kind of, for example, we'll go to Poland, and we'll kind of sit down and do some kind of roundtable sessions with artists, and we'll look at what their social media is saying. And that almost, in this day and age, it kind of exposes what value they have in a market by their figures. Their initially their figures, and then when you kind of get into it, the interactivity of what they're kind of seeing and their users are giving. I mean, it's not always the best way of going about it, but it's the most instant way to kind of gauge how popular they are or what have you. And it's kind of it's kind of a confused way of going about things, because it doesn't exactly show you what that thing is, or what that talent is, or what the the value of that product really is. It's kind of so I think there's a lot. I mean, it depends. When you've got an actual product, you can actually go to a market and people will interact with that thing, and they will talk about that thing because it does what it says it does. And it's when it's a kind of more of an artistic form, or it's very, so you have to kind of gauge each thing bit by bit. And there was a story I heard recently of a band who were they were kind of talking. They were based in the UK, and they were talking to a lot of different kind of the major label side of the industry, which is a whole world of pain anyway. But they were talking there, and their kind of their starting point for those conversations was the fact that they had like 500,000 likes on Facebook. So that straight away, the industry were looking at that and going, this is that's a serious population. Like that's something which we need to get into. So without even really getting to understand what the music is and what the personalities are and what, there's fundamental things that people buy into, they're just looking at this figure and they're thinking, brilliant. But then when they actually got into the analytics of it, it was like, I think it was something like 496,500 were from India. And so there's no interactivity. It's like bought numbers, which is totally kind of flawed. So, I think there's a lot you kind of got to get into when you're looking at these international artists and how they kind of relate to markets and what it's kind of doing your homework a lot more and making sure they, like I said earlier, they have what they need to present themselves right in every element, really.
I'd speak a bit to that verification issue as well, because I think social media is understood at so many variant levels, I think, depending on the industry you're talking to. And of course, we're talking to major US retail. So it's a lovely thing to be able to trade on. And Sugu does have a very strong social media history, and a very, very big part of the catalyst of growth is word of mouth. And social media has explicitly been our platform, Twitter and Facebook, as the kind of two major drivers. And that's a lovely thing, and it's definitely been global, and we've been able to have all of that. We use it as a consumer conversation. It's all about their experience of use coming back to us via our social media. But when you start to stabilize, and I would speak to the music industry, obviously falls into the same trap, those numbers can seduce effectively. Now, happily, we don't have a fraud issue in ours, but to arrive at target, when you actually do your analysis pre a meeting and you're looking at their base and where their growth is coming from and all of the energies that they're putting into something, Target, for example, as a US retailer, Lowe's as a US retailer in the DIY space, amazing things start to happen because they have extraordinary numbers on social media. Luckily, I mean, they've been quick to adopt to that trend and are really driving some of that sort of antiquated retail machine into the modern age. But it's lovely to be something tiny coming out of Hackney in the east of London and saying, well, yeah, it is 9 million views on YouTube actually, and yeah, 4.5 million of them are in the US. So I think some people know about us, and that's a tool that previously I would have had to have advocated only on the properties of the product, only on the proof that the buyer loved it, rather than the real old-fashioned retail approach. But suddenly you get this sort of smothering of the interaction with all this glorious global audience. And so absolutely, I take Danny's point that it must be used with caution, and you mustn't let that maybe big dinosaur in the room misread those numbers. Don't manipulate your data, but definitely where it is powerful, use it, and use it with pride, because likely is you're ahead of them on the curve. So it's a lovely thing to be nimble and be fast adopters of that and show them how it's done. And then that speaks lastly to that point of partnership. Once you are then selling to them, what you want to do is engage with all of that wonderful social media that they're using, slightly boring compared to what you're doing maybe, but numbers are there. There's new consumers waiting to hear about you, with vibrant channels that are being manned by big teams. We've got 2 people in Hackney 24 hours a day, motoring on this, and they're like, oh yeah, we got 12 guys in our Twitter team. You should talk to them. We're like, well, okay, great. Let's talk to Twitter. So it's exciting, but it is one of those things that I think it's always, you still have to do your commercials right, you still have to get the deal done, but it can be a lovely catalyst.
And often the larger players are looking for guidance from more nimble players, and I mean, that's really what's changing, I think, in business now. Social media in Uber, I mean, it seems that social media has been really powerful as a driver. I mean, it seems that it's not so much marketing as in word of mouth and social media that's sort of driven some of the expansion.
Yeah, exactly. We do almost no above-the-line marketing particularly for riders. We sometimes do a bit to find drivers. So almost all of our marketing is either through social media or through referral programs like Give 10, Get 10. So at the moment, if you give £10 of credit to a friend to try Uber, when they ride, you'll get £10 back yourself. And obviously that gets very viral. And then we do marketing partnerships with events or venues where they have an interest in getting people to the event. We have an interest in getting people into the car. We believe if you have a first free ride with Uber, you'll love the experience and ride again. And so then we can share this offer to all of the attendees of the event or the venue. But from a social media standpoint, I think a couple of important things. One is we're still very decentralized on social media as well. So every single city has its own Twitter handle. The one you see up here is actually for Uber globally, but we have Uber LDN for London. We have MCR for Manchester, same for Dublin. And that's manned by that community manager in the city who really knows the city. So what you hear is a really local voice who's talking about what's going on this week in Manchester, the specifics of the Manchester service and things like that. And I think that's been really important. The other thing is the real-time nature, and Katie touched on it, is especially with a company like Uber, people are using Twitter to report concerns, complaints, and things like that. And it's really important to have that monitored really regularly and have that then linking into a proper complaint resolution system. So we don't go into the details of a particular complaint on Twitter, but we are monitoring it often so that we know we can look into it, we can direct them into email to process their complaint. And people's expectations, as you all know, are very quick in terms of timings for response.
So in addition to social media, can you recommend any particular sort of go-to or best practice technology or resource or tip essentially that you would recommend to other SMEs looking to go global?
We generally kind of, we deliver files, information files, so like music files and images and things like that, and that is kind of a tough one to send because it's usually quite large, and via email you're constantly kind of clogging up people's inboxes. So we do use a lot of those kind of music delivery technologies like SoundCloud, and we use Dropbox, for example, and things like that. We as a company, because we are so small and we have partnerships in Berlin and Barcelona, we as a company use Google Documents, and we kind of have, you can edit real time, it's always good. Our accounting software is Intuit's QuickBooks, so we kind of, we can, wherever we are, we can update our accounting and also invoicing and things like that. So that's very useful for us as a small international business. But generally, yeah, we kind of do advise to everyone we speak to that you can't send MP3 files in emails. So we look at these kind of technologies that have been able to deliver effectively to the industry, and so it's kind of, there's a lot of in particularly in music, there's a lot of kind of people that will only use certain types of software. So they'll only listen to things via SoundCloud, for example. So that's kind of how we generally base our delivery on.
Okay, great.
We also do a lot of video conferences, obviously, because people are distributed around the world. So using Zoom and Google Hangouts, but it makes a real difference just to be able to see the people instead of talking on the phone, being able to see them. So we'll all, one critical thing for us is that every office has a really good internet connection. And it was a real pain point for us for a few weeks when it took too long to install the new line, just not being able to have that video contact with the other offices.
No, I would agree with that. The video conferencing has just made a massive difference in terms of that connection, even between the most far-flung offices, that you feel that you're really able to do business in a more personal way.
I'm tempted to say PayPal, but I won't. That would be a bit too self-serving. I'm going to say instead, look at shipping carefully, because if you can get a good shipping provider at a good rate and they're reliable, it can make a huge difference. I mean, it's all very well having next generation broadband, but if you're relying on a postal service, which is sometimes from a previous generation, it's an awful lot harder, and it just means that you have endless customer pain points. People constantly calling up customer service and saying, where's my package? Why hasn't it turned up yet? So I think that's well worth investing in. I would just come back to the point I made earlier on about mobile optimization. I mean, you really can't invest in it enough. It will make a huge difference to your overall growth in cross-border trade. We did some analysis with Nielsen fairly recently, and it was clear that the overall level of cross-border trade online was predicted to treble from, I think, about 100 billion in 6 major markets that we'd identified to about 300 billion. And what was also interesting was that the percentage of that which was mobile generated was predicted to increase. So it's going to become more and more important as time goes on, and it'll be essential to your cross-border trade strategy.
On the next panel, we're going to be hearing from some representatives from government. So a couple questions on that. So have you turned to the UK government for help in connection with either overseas expansion or for setting up here in the UK? Can you talk about some of your experiences with that?
There's been quite a distinct lack of support in music, well, from my knowledge anyway, with government help. But fairly recently, the past couple of years, there are kind of little I guess, kind of just from a financial point of view, kind of grants available for musicians who, can qualify being a valid business proposition and kind of whether it be for export for going to kind of showcase events. There are certain things you can apply for through PRS and UKTI and then also, kind of grants you can apply for and different kind of educational schemes that you can sign up for when you can qualify that you have the need to progress as an artist and develop, and you need that financial support that maybe traditionally kind of the industry being kind of record labels would usually step in and help give you that little bit of financial support. So, there are various things at the minute that are starting to get better, and we've recently advised the Arts Council on what funding is available in the UK for kind of contemporary music and how that should best be delivered to the industry and how people could be made more aware of it. But we do an awful lot of work in Canada, for example, and their funding set up for creative industries is incredibly supportive on a lot of levels. And, we kind of, as a business, have kind of built what we do and formed our approach to generally the international market through being an export office for a lot of the Canadian provinces who are wanting to kind of develop their not only for the export and to kind of show off their talent. It's more about they kind of allow us to go into the market and speak one-to-one with the artists, and whether it be through panels like this or roundtable sessions or workshops, we get to kind of help form their view of how they should kind of the importance of it, if they should even think about doing that, if it's kind of, I guess, looking at it and being a kind of trying to fit a kind of square peg in a round hole sometimes. Like, people want to look at breaking the UK market or the US market, but then sometimes they shouldn't do that because there's no marketplace for them there. So, we help them form that opinion and understanding of what relevance they have in those places, and then if they do qualify or, in theory qualify, then we look at how we can help them set themselves up and have the knowledge, and then we act as the kind of on-the-ground people for them in Europe, so we can kind of help them with their business development in terms of who they turn to for representation, whether it be, for the kind of the live bookings or their PR representation or whatever. We kind of go to the people that we, through experience, know get that kind of music and look for those kind of styles and those points of view on it, and then we kind of piece all that together. So, yeah, basically, we kind of find a lot of support through kind of certain government setups in internationally, and that's kind of how we've developed our understanding of the market and how we've moulded ourselves to fit in with what they need and help that support system.
Thanks. And Dan, I want to follow up on something that you said, specifically with respect to Canada. The title of the program references transatlantic startups, and I think that Canada is just as transatlantic as the U.S. And certainly, as an American, one of the things that I've been hearing about is how aggressive Canada and the Canadian government has been with the U.S. in terms of making itself as attractive as possible to companies coming into Canada. I don't know if you or anybody else can maybe speak to some of those experiences with working with the Canadian government, because certainly what we're hearing in the States is that Canada is even more open to business than anywhere else.
Yeah, and they're very keen to kind of develop their local industries. I mean, I've recently come back from a short trip to the west of Canada, and they've there's kind of 5 provinces there who have joined forces to present a music showcase festival called Breakout West, which is also partnered with the West Coast Music Awards. And what they do, which is really great, is I already work for 3 of those provinces, so they've come to me and they've asked who I think the relevant industry professionals are in the UK, through Europe, mainly Germany, who the relevant people are to kind of bring out into Canada and show them how they work and show them the talent that's available. The main problem they have is the kind of distances between relevant communities and markets. It's, for the music world, it's incredibly tough for a musician because you can travel for a day before you get to the next town, whereas the UK, 2 hours and you're in the next city. But generally, the kind of infrastructure that's enabled through the government initiatives and through the kind of there's a really great kind of community and kind of the radio stations do offer back a lot into their communities. And if you qualify by selling a certain amount of records or doing a certain amount of shows, you can access certain grants that will enable you to kind of support a growth in that. And they're just very good at being open to, I guess, kind of setting up in your community and allowing the support around you through this kind of international education understanding, which means that you don't have to go to these places and try and kind of figure out what happens. You can speak to people like myself, who's employed through the creative industry setup that you were involved in.
Great. I thought I saw a question from the floor, so I want to went to there for a second.
I don't know if I need a mic. So I was wondering if you could maybe describe a little bit of your experience or challenges around data, and maybe a couple of different things. When you're moving from the EU to the United States, there's differences in privacy regulations, and I was wondering if that has affected you at all in terms of your ability to transfer data. But then also when you're looking at moving, thank you. But then also when you're looking at moving more broadly data, there are things that come up like protection of intellectual property rights and whether your ideas and innovations will be protected. Export control regulations, if there's sensitive data that may not be able to be shared with certain parties. Do you think about those things? Do they come up? Do they affect how you do your business?
Oh yes, absolutely. So your previous question was really about how some of the various governments that we work with have helped us. So one issue we've faced recently, and it's becoming a bit of a global trend, is the issue of data localization, whereby certain countries or jurisdictions will insist upon having a local presence in terms of a local data center, data storage, as a condition for doing business in that jurisdiction. And that can impose very significant costs on startups. It can impose very significant costs on big global businesses like EB Inc. And so we faced an issue recently in Turkey, which is still a live one, I guess. But we have been encouraged by the support that we've received, not just from local policymakers on the ground in Turkey, but also from the US Department of Commerce in helping us, establish relationships with the local actors there. There are obviously issues about the transfer of data between the EU and the US. We, by and large, as a kind of large global multinational, get around that through binding corporate rules, and that's one way you can tackle the problem. There are also kind of various agreements and sort of model terms, I think, that you can adopt, which would allow the transfer of data between the EU and the US. But it's very much a live issue, and it's definitely one worth thinking about when you're looking to expand globally, because you'll be touching customers all around the world, and how you share and manage and process that data is particularly important. You asked to think about export control regulations. There have been obviously attempts to make the whole process a lot easier through mutual recognition schemes, and I think we're definitely making progress in that regard. But you have programs like the Authorised Economic Operator Programme, which tend to be open to very large businesses or logistics companies or whatever, and we ought to look at whether there's a way of opening those up to smaller operators, whether that's via other intermediaries or or other solutions, it's still not very SMB friendly in that respect. You asked generally about regulation, and I make one comment here, which is that the UK government, I think, has been, in many ways, very, very tech friendly, and it tends to adopt a very open attitude towards free trade. But of course, the challenge, it seems to me, is that the UK is but one of 28 EU member states, and therefore, in an EU where maybe some other countries have a slightly more protectionist or less tech-friendly attitude to public policy, the challenge, it seems to me, is how do we build alliances with other like-minded nations, whether those are the Nordic countries or some of the Baltic countries. You get Estonia, a great record in attracting some digital companies. Ireland as well. There are loads of potential allies there, and I think that's the challenge for the UK going forward. I think I'll probably leave it there, but there's a ton you could say on the whole issue of kind of regulation and cross-border trade.
I'll just add an additional point about patents in case that's relevant for anybody in the room. Patents are, you may know, expensive to file, and Sugru is a patent-protected product, which we're very proud to say, but we are pending in the USA, and that's been a very interesting journey. One that actually, when I was planning and when you're kind of looking ahead to some of the challenges you think may lie down the road, I thought that might trip us up a little more in this last 6 months than it has. We're in our third round of questioning from the examiner, and I had really wanted to have patent protection in place before trading into major retail, but it's, as I say, pending. Interestingly, granted in China, whether that would ever be something you could fight, and then pending in India. So we chose, and we are granted in the EU, we chose 4 positions globally to file in to try and create that reach and coverage that we felt we needed as a business. Truth is, as you grow, you want to continually reevaluate that position because you may want to be a little bit more specific in territories as opportunities arise. But as I say, the US, the pending position is powerful, so filing is to be advised because you want to be in that process continually, really, to have it as a defended position. And as I say, time will tell that will, we hope, be granted imminently, and then we are in the sort of I's dotted, T's crossed environment. But it is something to plan for in terms of cash flow. It's something to plan for in terms of advice. We were very, very lucky. We receive from Marks and Clarks here in the UK really exemplary advice in our IP space, but that's not cheap. And so it's one thing to think about and plan ahead for.
Just actually a quick follow-up on that. So how do you decide as a company where would be the best places to seek IP protection?
Yeah, I mean, I should be open to say these decisions precede my joining the company, but the idea of India, China, EU, and US was to create essentially a global picture immediately. As I say, I don't mean to be flippant about the China point. We are very cautious about our situation in China. We already have some fraudulent activity around our brand occurring in that territory, and it's something to be very mindful of, specifically trading in the adhesive space. That's obviously a manufacturing territory in that regard. And as I say, we're granted there, so it's also one thing to say it's great news that you get granted, but to be in the vulnerable position of a startup growing at the speed we are, it's also about whether you take stop, pause, and fight it also. So we took a view that we'll continue to take just basically a cautious position. We haven't moved any distribution policy or any partnership into the China space yet. We actually have also, due to shipping is the issue which Alistair's already raised, we've actually shut down service to China, Russia, and Brazil this year simply because the cost was outweighing the benefit. We were replacing and replenishing as many packs as were attempting to get through those borders as were not reaching the customer. So as I say, the position was taken on those 4 filings at the initial outset. I would suggest we're probably in a position next year to review that again, to say, for example, Asia Pac is pulling very strongly. Do we need additional protection at more territory levels down there? We haven't even tackled South America, and I think that's something that we really do want to get wise to quick, given the pull that's coming from the larger communities, the larger countries in territory down there. So it's an ongoing, and as I say, external advice is key.
Thank you. On the IP protection, You mentioned you got an IP in China, but from a business perspective, obtaining a patent in China, in practical terms, actually, you've just revealed the methods of what you're doing. So from a legal perspective, are you advising folks going into some of the more exciting territories that actually better it's not to file for patents?
Well, look, I mean, in terms, is that direct to me? Yeah. So in terms of revealing the invention, I mean, regardless of whether you file in China or whether if you filed in the U.S., you're still revealing it to the public, right? I mean, you could still see it in China. I mean, the one thing that I guess I would say from an IP standpoint is that, you know, patents can be valuable in different ways. In some respects, you could argue that a patent is only as valuable as your willingness to enforce it. And that's the downside maybe of a patent in China. Maybe it's a little bit more difficult to enforce it in practice, right, in China than it is in the US and some other systems. On the other hand, you know, there is real value in terms of prestige, in terms of perceived value of the company, and in terms of perceived, you know, global presence of the company in presenting, you know, a global patent structure. And I think, you know, from what I heard from Katie, is certainly things that we hear from other companies is that, okay, you know, are they actually going to leverage the China patent by suing regularly in China? Maybe not, right? But to be able to present that whole picture of, you know, we are a global product with, you know, global patent protection, you know, has benefits, I think, in probably many other ways as well.
I think I'd maybe add to that, almost as important, if not more important, is really guarding your supply chain very, very carefully. I mean, one of the problems you've seen with some global brands is they have set up operations in jurisdictions which have low labour costs, but then they find very quickly that having taught people locally to produce their products, they set up parallel supply chains, and that's where the problem frequently occurs with, you know, with counterfeit and other problems.
Question from the...
Yeah, I did John Bridenstine with the U.S. Embassy here in London. I want to go a little bit further than what Dan did regarding visas, because obviously that is something that is of interest and of concern to everybody here. I'll start off by saying I'm not a visa expert. I'm not an immigration expert. But building on what Dan said, I wanted to let you all know that there is a group of tech-related individuals back in Washington who are very interested in renewing our economy and attracting the kind of investment, the kind of job creation that you all would bring in terms of starting up, launching, scaling your businesses in the United States. And as Dan mentioned, there is a movement afoot in the absence of comprehensive immigration reform to come up with a fix, particularly for tech startups. In the bill that passed the Senate but that did not pass the House, there was actually a digital entrepreneur visa in that package. But in the absence of comprehensive immigration reform, which could be a couple years off still, the tech community in the United States, together with folks who are interested in attracting this kind of investment, are preparing something that could potentially come out in the next several months. Now, the reason I raise that and the reason I want to go a little bit further is that once that announcement comes out, or even prior to that, once we get close to that, in order to convince Congress and to convince the White House that this is a good idea, you know, for this fix for tech entrepreneurs, we're going to need people like you jumping on board and saying, hey, you know, if we had a tech visa, this is the number of jobs we could create in the United States. And by getting tech entrepreneurs like you to jump behind a movement like this, which is coming from private individuals in the United States, it will make a big difference to Congress and to the White House when they see all these tech startups who are saying, you know, if we came, we'd create 5 jobs, 6 jobs, 7 jobs. And when you add up all those together, it'll make the case of these tech entrepreneurs in the United States much more forceful if they've got potential investors, potential startups from overseas looking at the U.S. market behind them. So I would really encourage you to stay tuned for an announcement that probably will come out between now and January. And once you do see that, I would encourage you to jump on board because we need your help. Thanks.
Thanks, John. That's very, very helpful. I think another question from the floor.
What would you advise in terms of setting up a supply chain? Because certainly as a small startup, that it looks like a very expensive and difficult process. So any shortcuts would be much appreciated.
I don't know whether I have shortcuts, I'm sorry, but what I would say is be careful to not become over-reliant on certain suppliers. One of the things we have Sugru is a very complex material to make, and we have, I think, just shy of 20 different ingredients that we require supply from. We do source those globally, and we do very, very hard work around making sure that we have duplicate suppliers to that, so that we don't ever get caught out in a production crunch at the wrong moment, which we obviously, as a small team, as a small growing business with limited cash flow, run an incredibly lean supply chain as well. And let me tell you, when you're the person going out negotiating US retail requirements, that's a horrible place to be, because it is absolutely talking about ramp up potentially times 10 in month to month. Retail is very, very lumpy, whereas an e-commerce history is a lovely sort of continuum compared. So, and that speaks exactly to your supply chain question, which is we require multiple suppliers against those materials to make sure that should we get really, really wonderful peaks, which of course as a young company you have to chase as hard as you can, that you don't knock yourself over in the process. And that's a really, really constant fight. The one thing that I would say is don't think you're small. You could be really big to them. And that's something that I think a lot of people make the mistake in negotiations early. We tend to, and again, it speaks a little bit to what we spoke about at the beginning of this panel, in the context of Britain, we tend to play a fairly humble behaviour, especially in entrepreneurship. We don't sort of come out all guns blazing. So, you know, even in my supply chain manager and listening to my the sourcing team within that one individual, I can hear a humility in how the negotiation is going on. And obviously, I come from the sales side, so I'm like, I'm wondering whether that's getting the result that it needs to get us. And, you know, that's difficult. We're a small team. So, you know, I have to be sensitive to the fact that he's a manufacturing guy. He knows his story. But I did sit down with the production team about a year ago and say, can we grow a pair, please? Because I think that some of the issues that we're looking at from a general management structure, and obviously my role sits in the senior management team of 7, so I'm looking at these issues continually and trying very sensitively to interface sales and opportunity to them. It was a wonderful moment, actually, for the company, because it did switch our behaviour. It did move to a pride. It did kind of take a slightly different approach to that marketplace, which is to say, as I say, we're small. We know we're small. But actually, to you guys cutting us our foil 3 layers in a little unit out there in Wimbledon, we're massive. We've changed their business in the last 2 years. Who needs 3-layer foil? Nobody but Sugru. So it's one of those things that I think it's good to analyse it. I would spend time on it, get experts on that, get careful in your hiring in that space, because you want to make sure that you are setting the tone and getting the results you need continually. And of course, review it continually. That's the thing. Do not rest on your laurels. Every 6 months you should be in a very detailed reflection on where everything stands.
We touched already on the importance of having your A team in the actual growing marketplace. Thank you. But if initially that's not possible for an SME, how would the panel go about finding the correct partner in that marketplace, and are there any pitfalls?
I don't want to hog the conversation, sorry. There are pitfalls aplenty. And I think I spoke a little bit to the personality of your brand can really influence that. So as I say, it's a real benefit to Sugru, but it's also a bit of a catch-22, which is that we tend to attract aspiring entrepreneurs. And this is not to disrespect any of the personalities in this room and how you strive. But one of the things that I would say is that as an SME and at a particular crucial point of growth, sometimes you need stability and sometimes you need a big player on the other side. And that can be quite a hard conversation to have, actually, because you can go through a process of feeling like you're crushing a few people's dreams in the process, because what they want you to do is have this ingrained behavior as a brand, which is that if you're going into a territory, you're going to find your next Jane, right? You're going to find the equivalent thrill seeker 4 years on in your journey to start Brazil, for example. But the truth is, if we truly are going to start Brazil, I don't need another Jane. I need somebody that's gone on that journey well ahead of us, because the pitfalls of growth, nobody wants to learn lessons twice. And as I say, I think as a brand, that really does kind of cut to the core of sometimes a bit of a contradiction of us emerging into the market, is that as much as we want to have a gung-ho behavior, as much as we want to do things differently, and that's one thing I would speak to, certainly in retail, I don't want old, tried and tested, 30 years long in the tooth kind of behaviors. I've got a quirky, funky little brand. I need somebody to go in there and sell it distinctly and uniquely, but I also need them to know how to sell it and get round the endless journey and red tape and time that retail can throw down for you. And so I feel like a lot of my answers today have said it's a balance, but it really is a balance. I think, and it speaks to the point that Joe made at the beginning, go slow on it, interview a lot, make time for it. The Skype video conferencing conversations, get in front of their eyes, because people can hide behind email and hide behind, here's my references even, and suddenly you start to unpick and think something just doesn't feel right. And check trade references if you're going into a distribution relationship. Don't take their word for it, because everything can look wonderful by the numbers, but the truth is the numbers aren't what drive your day-to-day business. They are your end result, but the day-to-day interaction with that distribution partner is actually what can kill you. So it is interrogating it continually and getting just enough hunger for growth and be a game changer for them. That's the other thing I talk to them a lot about, is that potentially one of the benefits is, and I hope some products that may be being represented here today have multiple vertical sectors to serve, and we are very blessed with Sugru, is that we're not just home and DIY. We've got real pull from consumer electronics, real pull from outdoor and sports, which might mean that from a distribution relationship or even from a sales agent relationship, they might have to learn a few new tricks too, and might have to go out and find a few new relationships too. So probably be careful to make sure that you're negotiating yourself into a deal that is also their engine for growth.
We've actually got a team that helps us achieve that balance. So we have an expansion team, or a launch team as they're called, and they're actually very good at going into those new markets and setting up the business. But as Katie's alluded to a bit, the challenge of actually growing that business in some ways takes a different skill set. So we have one team that's really good at going into those new markets, setting up the company, doing all the legal stuff, finding an office, finding the team, doing the translations, all of that, and the really hard work, walking on the streets, talking to drivers, talking to partners. And part of their responsibility then is, while they're there in the market, to find your general manager, to find your team to actually grow it. But essentially, we've not done it with partners. I mean, our model's a bit different, but essentially, if we don't find that team, either we don't go into the market or that launch team doesn't leave. So I've got some where the guy's still there, and like, you can go and you found the general manager.
So I think we're running up just about the end of time.
Yeah, and I wanted to... It's similar to what it's been said, but we generally kind of look at... we do an awful lot of research when we're partnering with someone in those territories, and we kind of work across a lot of different elements of the music and cultural industries. And one of them is we do a lot of kind of the conference music festival side of things. And a lot of the people that we've partnered up with our international offices have come from that world of actually, we know them and we've worked with them on various things and kind of got, we've brought them in because we know they will add something from our experience, and that will evolve our business, and having that full understanding on the ground in that territory is just totally invaluable to how we can further advise and get that on the ground. So it's a lot of kind of, even in a very young company, taking those experiences of those initial interactions and developments, and then kind of doing the research around it in the marketplace and figuring out who is going to add the value of personality and gets the whole kind of angle to your business, and wants to help develop that, and giving them the initiative. I mean, we generally partner up with people. So our Berlin office, for example, we've gone in and we've partnered with a person who is particularly valuable in terms of her knowledge of that industry and that marketplace and the various elements of the music side of things, and done a deal whereby she kind of comes in and she's worked as part of the company, but then takes her business and we help the infrastructure and supporting that as well. So there's a lot of to and fro in terms of how we've built our international offices, and it's just providing initiative for people to grow, basically, which in turn helps you grow.
Joe, Alistair, Katie, Danny, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Hopefully get a round of applause for